The timestamp on the last radio check was 0317. I know that because I wrote it down twice. Once in the field log, once on the back of my hand with a ballpoint pen. Because by that point, I had stopped trusting the equipment, and I had stopped trusting myself, and I needed something I could look at under a flashlight and know was real. 0317, Station 9, Ridge Access Road, North Spur. I transmitted my position and my badge number the way I had 6,000 times before, and the repeater tower acknowledged with its usual quarter-second click, and then the channel went silent. Not dead. Not static. Silent in the way that a room is silent when someone has just stopped talking. And then the channel began transmitting a 6-digit number I had never heard before. Not a badge, not a frequency code, not a timestamp. It came through in the automated voice the system uses for equipment alerts, flat and feminine and bored, and it read the number once, paused for exactly 4 seconds, and read it again. I wrote that down too. I still have the piece of paper. The number corresponds to nothing in any database I've been able to access, and I have looked. Believe me, I have spent more time on that than I should admit. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that I am not someone who panics. I am methodical. I keep records. I double-check things. And I need you to know that before I tell you what I found under the ridge. Because if I tell you what was waiting down there, you'll understand why I can't drive that stretch of highway anymore. Not even in daylight. Not even with someone in the passenger seat. You'll understand why I requested reassignment. You'll understand why the request was denied and what the denial letter actually said, which is its own kind of horror. But I should start where it makes sense. My name isn't important, and I'm not going to use it. What matters is the job. I was a field maintenance technician for a regional flood control district in the Pacific Northwest. That's a civil engineering way of saying I drove a truck to remote infrastructure sites, checked gauges, replaced batteries in sensor packages, cleared debris from intake grates, and filed condition reports that nobody read. The district covers about 1,100 square miles of watershed, most of it timber company land and Bureau of Land Management parcels, and the infrastructure is old. Some of it dates back to Army Corps projects from the 1950s. Concrete culverts, buried diversion tunnels, pump stations built into hillsides. The kind of thing you drive past on a logging road and never think about. My patrol rotation covered the eastern sector, which included 16 monitoring stations, 4 pump houses, 2 repeater towers, and the ridge. The ridge didn't have an official name on any of our maps. Internally, we called it Station 9 because that's where the 9th telemetry relay was bolted to a concrete pad near the top. But everyone who worked the eastern sector just called it the ridge. It sat at about 2,200 feet, running roughly north-south for about 1.5 miles, with the Klamath Fork of the reservoir on the west side and a long, empty stretch of state highway on the east. The access road climbed up from the highway through second-growth Douglas fir, crossed a locked gate at the halfway point, and dead-ended at the relay pad. From the pad, a foot trail continued north along the ridgeline for another 1/4 mile to a sealed maintenance hatch that led down into one of the old diversion tunnels. The hatch was a 3x3 steel plate set into a concrete collar, and it had been welded shut in 2004. I know the year because someone had scratched it into the weld bead with an awl or a screwdriver tip. The restriction on the ridge was simple, and at the time, entirely reasonable. The North Slope had experienced a series of shallow landslides after a fire in 2001. The soil was unstable. The old tunnel underneath had been decommissioned because ground movement had cracked the liner in several places, and there were concerns about subsidence. Engineering had flagged the whole ridgeline as a liability zone. There was a memo in the operations manual, updated annually, that read, Station 9 relay pad accessible for scheduled telemetry maintenance only. No patrol activity north of relay pad. Ridge trail closed per Risk Management Directive RM-0447. Access to maintenance hatch prohibited. Refer structural concerns to Engineering Division. That was it, a paragraph in a binder nobody opened. When I was trained on the Eastern Sector route, my supervisor, a man named Dale Purcell, who had worked for the district for 23 years, told me the same thing in fewer words. He said, "Don't patrol that ridge past the relay pad. It's not worth the paperwork if you fall through something." I asked him if anyone ever went up there. He said County Search and Rescue had pulled a hiker out of the area in 2009 who had broken an ankle in a sinkhole. He said there was a report on file, but he had never read it. He said the ridge was boring and unstable, and there was nothing up there but trees and bad footing, and that I should focus my time on the pump stations, which actually mattered. For 2 years I did exactly that. The first anomaly was on a Thursday in October. I was making my normal evening run on the eastern sector. The route takes about 6 hours if you don't rush, starting at dusk and finishing around midnight. I had checked stations 6 through 8 and was driving north on the state highway toward the Station 9 access road turnoff. It was about 9:40 at night. The highway was empty, which was normal. That stretch runs for 31 miles without a town or a gas station or even a reliable cell signal. It's 2 lanes, no median, lined with those old sodium vapor lights that the State Department of Transportation still hasn't replaced. They throw that flat orange light that turns everything the same dead color, and between them the darkness is absolute. I've driven that road hundreds of times. I know every curve and every bridge and every place where deer like to stand on a shoulder and stare at you. I am not someone who gets uneasy on empty roads. But that night, as I approached the turnoff, I heard an engine, not on the highway, from the west, from the direction of the reservoir. Now, I need to explain something about sound propagation over open water, because this is the detail that kept me from reporting the anomaly, and I think about that decision a lot. Sound travels differently across water than it does over land. On a calm night with a temperature inversion, which is common in our valley in October, engine noise from a boat can carry for miles with almost no attenuation. The sound arrives with a clarity that makes it seem close, much closer than the source actually is. I knew this. I had heard it before, sitting on the dock at the district's boat ramp on the south end of the reservoir, listening to fishing boats that sounded like they were 100 yards out, but were actually a mile or more away. The water plays tricks. You hear the low frequencies first because they propagate farther, and your brain fills in the distance wrong. It's a well-documented acoustic phenomenon. So when I heard that engine sound, my first assumption was a boat on the reservoir. Late-season fishing is legal there until November. My second assumption was that the temperature inversion was making it seem louder and closer than it was. But I was on the highway. The reservoir was at least 2 miles west, down the slope, through dense timber. I should not have been able to hear a boat engine that clearly from inside my truck with the windows up. I pulled over. I rolled down the window. The sound was there, steady, a low diesel throb, and it was not coming from the reservoir. It was coming from the ridge. Specifically, it was coming from somewhere along the ridgeline north of the relay pad, and it did not sound like a boat. It sounded like a generator, a stationary engine running at constant RPM. I sat there for about 2 minutes. The sound continued without variation. I picked up the radio and called dispatch, which at that hour was a single operator in a shared facility with the county's water treatment plant. I told them I was hearing mechanical noise from the Station 9 ridgeline and asked if there was any scheduled maintenance or equipment running in that area. The dispatcher, whose name was Kim, checked the board and told me there was nothing scheduled. She asked if I wanted to log it. I said yes. She gave me a ticket number. Ticket WO88417, logged at 21:53 on October 11th. I wrote it in my field book. I told Kim I would check it out on my next scheduled visit to the relay pad. She said copy, and that was it. By the time I finished the radio exchange, the sound had stopped. I want to be clear about my state of mind. I was not frightened. I was mildly curious and mostly annoyed, because unexplained mechanical noise in a liability zone means paperwork. That's all I was thinking about. Paperwork. My next scheduled visit to the relay pad was the following Tuesday. I drove up the access road in the late afternoon, unlocked the gate at the halfway point, and continued to the pad. The relay equipment was functioning normally. I replaced the battery in the solar charge controller, cleared some debris from the drainage channel around the concrete pad, and logged my readings. Then I stood at the north end of the pad and looked up the ridge trail. The trail was overgrown but not impassable. I could see about 30 yards before it curved around a stand of young fir. Everything looked normal. I listened for 5 minutes and heard nothing mechanical. I noted this in my field book and drove back down. That should have been the end of it. I had done my due diligence, filed my ticket, checked the area. But on Wednesday morning, I pulled up the telemetry dashboard for Station 9, which I did routinely to verify that my battery replacement had taken, and I saw something I had never seen before. The relay had logged an equipment alert at 02:11 on Tuesday night, about 10 hours after I had left the site. The alert code was one I didn't recognize. I checked the reference manual. The code corresponded to a seismic vibration sensor, model SV40, which is a small geophone designed to detect ground movement near unstable structures. According to the relay's configuration file, the sensor was designated S9-GEO-03 and was listed as being installed at the maintenance hatch location, a quarter-mile north of the relay pad. I had never serviced that sensor. It was not on my maintenance schedule. I did not know it existed. I sent an email to my supervisor, Dale, asking about the sensor. He replied the next day. His email was 3 sentences long. He said he wasn't aware of any active sensors north of the relay pad. He said the sensor might be legacy equipment left over from the decommissioning in 2004. He said if it was generating alerts, I should forward them to engineering and let them handle it. He CC'd a woman named Valerie Chen in the engineering division with no additional comment. I forwarded the alert to Valerie Chen. I received an auto-reply saying she was on leave until October 28th. I sent a follow-up to the engineering division's general inbox. I received a ticket acknowledgement 3 days later. Ticket ENG-2-2-9-0-3. Status: pending review. Priority: standard. Estimated response time: 10 to 15 business days. In the meantime, the sensor kept logging alerts. Every night between 1 and 4 in the morning, S9-GEO-03 registered vibration events. They were short, usually between 15 and 45 seconds, and they occurred in clusters of 3 to 5 with irregular intervals. I downloaded the raw data and looked at the waveforms. They were not consistent with seismic activity or settling ground. They were rhythmic. They had a periodicity that looked, and I am being careful with my words here, like footsteps. Very heavy, very slow footsteps, or something being dragged, something with weight. I told myself it was an animal, a bear maybe, walking near the sensor housing, a fallen tree shifting in the wind and transmitting vibrations through the ground. The sensor was old and possibly degraded. There were explanations. I listed them in my field book. I listed 3. Then I drew a line under them because none of them accounted for the regularity. Every night, same time window, same pattern of clusters. Animals are not that consistent. Wind is not that consistent. Degraded sensors produce noise, not structured data. On October 24th, a Friday, I decided to go up to the ridge at night. I want to be precise about my reasoning because people have asked me why I did this, and I think they expect me to say curiosity or bravery, and it was neither. It was professional obligation. I had an unidentified sensor generating anomalous data on infrastructure I was responsible for monitoring. My supervisor had deferred to engineering. Engineering was on a 10 to 15 business day review cycle. Nobody was going to look at this before November. If there was a physical problem at the maintenance hatch, a ground collapse, unauthorized access, structural failure, and I had telemetry showing anomalous vibration and had done nothing, that was going to be on me. I had the ticket numbers to prove I'd reported it, but I also knew how these things went. Reports get buried, timelines slip. Somebody would eventually ask why the field tech didn't walk 200 yards to do a visual check. I was protecting myself. I drove up on Friday night. I reached the relay pad at 11:15. I sat in the truck for 10 minutes and listened. Nothing. No engine sound. No vibration I could feel. The sky was overcast, no moon, and the temperature was around 40 degrees. I took my flashlight, my radio, my field book, and a digital camera, and I walked north on the ridge trail. The trail was worse than it had looked from the pad. The ground was soft and uneven, and in several places the soil had slumped toward the west side, leaving narrow sections where the path was barely a foot wide with a steep drop into darkness. I went slowly. I checked my footing with every step. I could hear the reservoir below, faintly, the way you hear a large body of water at night, a kind of low ambient presence. No engines, no mechanical noise. After about 15 minutes, I reached the maintenance hatch. The first thing I noticed was the smell, not the expected forest smells of wet earth and Douglas fir, something metallic, sharp, like the air in an electrical room or the smell you get near old batteries that have started leaking. It was not strong, but it was distinct, and it was coming from the ground around the hatch. The second thing I noticed was the hatch itself. The weld that had sealed it shut in 2004 was broken. not cut with a tool. Broken. The steel plate had been pushed upward from beneath with enough force to crack the weld bead along 3 of its 4 sides. The plate was still in place, still sitting in its concrete collar. But it was loose. It could be lifted. I did not lift it. I photographed it. I photographed the broken weld from 4 angles. I checked the sensor housing, which was a small weatherproof box bolted to the concrete collar about 18 inches from the hatch. The housing was intact. The sensor cable disappeared into a conduit that ran back toward the relay pad. Everything looked physically normal except for the hatch. I knelt next to the concrete collar and put my ear close to the gap between the plate and the frame. The metallic smell was stronger there, and I could hear something. Not an engine, not footsteps. It was a low, uneven sound, almost biological, like air being forced through a constriction. Breathing, maybe, if the thing breathing had lungs the size of a car. It was deep and wet, and it came in long cycles, maybe 8 or 10 seconds for each one, and it resonated in the tunnel below in a way that made the steel plate vibrate against my fingertips. I stood up. I took 3 steps back. I keyed my radio and called dispatch. Kim had been replaced by the overnight operator, a man I didn't know. I gave my position and told him I had found structural damage at the Station 9 maintenance hatch and that the weld seal was compromised. I asked him to log it as urgent and contact engineering. He said he would log it and that engineering's emergency line was only staffed Monday through Friday, 7 to 5. He said he could contact the on-call facilities manager. I said yes. He put me on hold. I stood in the dark on that ridgeline for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, which I know because I was staring at my watch. And then he came back and said the on-call manager was not answering and that he had left a voicemail. He said there was nothing else he could do tonight. He asked if I was in immediate danger. I said no. He said to document the condition and submit a report through the normal channel. He gave me a new ticket number, WO 88701, and told me to have a safe night. I walked back to the relay pad. I got in my truck. I sat there for several minutes. The sound from the hatch was no longer audible from this distance, but the smell lingered in my nostrils, or I imagined it did. I drove down the access road, locked the gate, and pulled back onto the highway. The drive south on the highway that night was when something shifted in me. I want to describe this carefully because it's not a dramatic moment. It's not a jump scare. It's a change in perception. And once it happened, it didn't change back. The highway was empty, as it always was at that hour. The sodium lights threw their flat orange cones onto the asphalt. Between the lights, darkness, the broken center line ticking past, and I had the overwhelming sense that the highway was different, not different in any way I could articulate or measure. The same road, the same lights, the same curves, but it felt like a corridor, like something that was showing me exactly what it wanted me to see within those orange cones and hiding everything else just beyond the edge of the light. I drove 31 miles to the district office, and I did not see another vehicle. On Monday morning, I filed my report with photographs. I emailed Dale. I emailed engineering. I emailed the district safety officer. I CC'd everyone I could think of. Dale responded within an hour. He said he had forwarded the report to engineering and risk management, and that I should not return to the ridgeline until they had assessed the situation. His email had the tone of a man who was already composing the liability disclaimer in his head. Engineering responded on Tuesday. Valerie Chen was still on leave. Her backup, a man named Pratt, sent a 2-sentence reply saying the report had been received and assigned to their Q4 inspection queue. He said the estimated timeline for a site visit was 4 to 6 weeks. I called Pratt's office. I got voicemail. I called the engineering division's main number. A receptionist told me Pratt was in a meeting. I explained the situation. She said she would pass along the message. She asked if this was regarding an existing ticket. I gave her both ticket numbers. She said they were showing a status, pending review, priority, standard. I asked how to escalate the priority. She said I would need to submit a priority change request through my supervisor. I called Dale. Dale said he would look into it. He did not look into it. I know this because when I asked him about it on Thursday, he said he'd been in budget meetings all week and would get to it Friday. On Friday, he was out sick. I want you to understand this timeline because it matters. I reported a compromised seal on a decommissioned tunnel with anomalous sensor data and audible subterranean activity. And in 2 weeks, the institutional response was 3 emails, 2 voicemails, and a ticket status that never changed from pending review. On November 2nd, a Sunday night, I was not scheduled to patrol. I was home. I pulled up the telemetry dashboard out of habit. The vibration alerts from S9-GEO-03 had changed. They were no longer clustered. They were continuous. Starting at 12:47 that morning, the sensor had been registering uninterrupted vibration. Not rhythmic anymore. Steady, like a machine running, or like something pressing against the ground with constant force. And there was a new alert. From a sensor I had never seen on the dashboard before, S9-GEO-07. No location data, no installation record, no maintenance history. It had come online at 12:47, the same minute the continuous vibration started, and it was reporting temperature data. The temperature reading was 97.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Body temperature. That sensor, wherever it was touching something warm and alive. I drove up to the ridge that night. I know what you're thinking, but you have to understand that by this point I had spent 2 weeks watching data accumulate that nobody else was looking at. I had filed every report. I had made every call. The system had absorbed my concerns and returned nothing. I was the only person paying attention, and if I stopped, the data would just scroll into an archive that Pratt would review in 4 to 6 weeks. And by then, whatever was happening would either be over or would have become something much worse. I reached the relay pad at 11:40. I checked the telemetry readout on the relay housing. Both sensors were still active. The vibration was still continuous. The temperature reading was still 97.8. I walked the trail north. The metallic smell hit me about halfway, much stronger than before. Underneath it was something else, something organic and warm that I didn't want to identify. The air felt wrong, not cold, not warm, pressurized somehow, like the atmosphere in a stairwell that leads down into a space where a ventilation has failed, where the air has been sitting and thickening and acquiring properties that air in the open world does not have. When I reached the hatch, it was open. Not all the way. The steel plate had been pushed aside by about 8 inches, leaving a crescent-shaped gap. From that gap came a slow exhalation of air that moved my hair and smelled like blood and copper and something alkaline. The gap was dark. I shone my flashlight into it, and the beam penetrated about 5 feet before it diffused into nothing. Not darkness, a kind of opacity, like the air itself was too dense or too particulate to carry light. I moved the flashlight beam across the concrete collar, and that's when I saw the marks. Handprints on the underside of the steel plate, on the concrete collar, on the edges of the frame. Not human handprints. The proportions were wrong. The fingers were too long by a significant margin, and there were only 4 on each print. The prints were pressed into a thin layer of condensation on the steel, and they were fresh, minutes old at most. I took photographs. My hands were steady. I want you to know that. I took 7 photographs, and the timestamps are in the EXIF data, and my hands were steady for all of them. Then I heard the sound from below. The breathing sound, the same one from my first visit, but louder now with the hatch open, and it had changed. There was something layered into it, a higher register that rose and fell within each cycle. Not quite a voice, not quite mechanical. It was the sound of air moving through a space that was shaped to produce resonance, and whatever was shaping that space was not the tunnel's original architecture. I stepped back from the hatch. As I did, my flashlight beam swept across the small clearing around the sensor housing, and I saw a folding metal chair. It was an old chair, the kind you'd find in a church basement, rusted at the joints, and it was positioned about 6 feet from the hatch, facing away from it, facing south toward the relay pad, toward the direction I had walked from. The chair was rocking, slightly, forward and back, less than an inch of movement, the way a chair rocks when someone has just stood up from it. There was no wind. The air was perfectly still, except for the exhalation from the hatch. I did not approach the chair. I did not photograph the chair. That is my single regret, the one thing that might have constituted evidence that someone besides me could look at and not explain away. I did not photograph it because, in that moment, my body made a decision that my mind had not yet caught up to. I turned around and I walked south. I did not run. I walked at a pace that was controlled and deliberate, and I did not look back, and I did not stop until I was in my truck with the doors locked and the engine running. As I drove down the access road, my radio activated, not a call from dispatch. The channel opened on its own, which should not be possible without a transmission source. The automated voice read a series of numbers, not the same 6-digit string from before. This was longer. It took about 20 seconds to complete. Then the channel closed. I wrote down what I could remember. Later, at home, I compared the numbers to every reference I had access to. Part of the sequence matched the GPS coordinates of the maintenance hatch. The rest corresponded to nothing I could identify, except for the last 6 digits, which were a date. November 9th, 1 week away. I filed my report on Monday morning. I included the photographs of the handprints. I described the open hatch, the smell, the sound, the chair, the radio transmission. I emailed it to Dale, to Pratt, to the safety officer, to the district administrator, and to the county's emergency management coordinator. The safety officer responded first. She said she had reviewed the photographs and that the handprints were inconclusive and could be condensation artifacts. She said she had forwarded the report to risk management for review. Pratt responded on Tuesday. He said the maintenance hatch site visit had been moved up from the Q4Q and was now scheduled for November 17th, 8 days after the date in the radio sequence. Dale called me into his office on Wednesday. He closed the door. He told me, in careful and practiced language, that I had been patrolling beyond my authorized area in violation of Directive RM-0447, and that this had been noted in my file. He said risk management had reviewed my reports and determined that the sensor data was consistent with equipment malfunction. He said the engineering division would inspect the hatch on the 17th per their revised schedule. He said I was not to return to the ridgeline for any reason. He said the words exposure to liability 3 times in 4 minutes. I went home. I watched the telemetry dashboard. On November 6th, S9-GEO-07, the phantom sensor with the body temperature reading went offline. The temperature at the moment it disconnected was 99.1 degrees. Rising. On November 7th, S9-GEO-03 stopped logging vibration data, not because the vibration stopped, because the sensor itself stopped transmitting. The last data point was a vibration amplitude 3 times higher than anything it had previously recorded. On November 8th, the telemetry relay at Station 9 went offline entirely. No signal, no error code, just gone, as if someone had pulled the power cable and the backup battery simultaneously. On November 9th, the date from the radio sequence, I stayed home. I sat in my living room. I did not go near the highway. I did not look at the dashboard. I left every light in my house on, and I sat in a chair that was pushed against the wall so that nothing could be behind me. At 2:14 in the morning, I heard an engine sound, low, diesel, steady RPM. It lasted for about 90 seconds. It was coming from outside, from the east. My house is 14 miles from the ridge. I did not go to the window. On November 17th, the engineering team drove up to the relay pad. I know this because Pratt sent a brief summary to the distribution list. The relay had been damaged by what he described as an apparent animal intrusion into the equipment housing. The solar panel was cracked. The battery was missing. He noted that it would be replaced in the next maintenance cycle. Regarding the maintenance hatch, his report was 1 paragraph long. He said the hatch was found sealed, not welded, sealed with new bolts that were not district-issued hardware. He said the ground around the hatch showed no evidence of structural compromise. He said the old sensor housing had been removed, and there was no equipment at the site corresponding to the designations S9-GEO-03 or S9-GEO-07. He recommended no further action. The ticket was closed. I pulled the telemetry archive the next day. Every data point I had logged, every alert, every waveform, every temperature reading was gone. The database showed no historical records for either sensor. The ticket numbers still existed in the work order system, but the description fields were blank. My field reports were in my email sent folder, but the attachments, the photographs, were corrupted. Every single one. Unrecoverable, according to IT, who attributed it to a server migration that had happened the previous weekend. I still have my field book, the handwritten notes, the dates, the ticket numbers, the sequence of numbers from the radio transmission. I still have the ballpoint ink on the back of my left hand from that night, though it's faded to a faint blue-gray shadow that I can only see in certain light. I still have the smell in my memory, copper and alkaline and something warm that does not belong underground. I requested reassignment to the Western Sector on November 21st. The request was denied on December 3rd. The denial letter, which came from Human Resources, not from my supervisor, stated that staffing allocations for the current fiscal year do not support intersector transfers, and that my assignment would be reviewed during the annual rotation cycle in July. It was signed by someone I had never heard of with a title I had never seen in the org chart. I still drive the Eastern Sector, I still check the stations, I still file my reports. I do not drive the access road to Station 9. The relay was never replaced. The telemetry dashboard shows the station as inactive, and no one has asked about it. I drive the highway at night under those sodium lights, and I keep my windows up and my radio off. The highway still feels like a corridor. The darkness between the lights still feels curated, like something is choosing what I'm allowed to see. 3 weeks ago, I was at my kitchen table at 7 in the morning, drinking coffee and reviewing the day's route, and I heard a sound from the basement. Not the engine sound, something smaller, a creak of metal, the kind a folding chair makes when weight shifts on it. I went to the top of the basement stairs. The air coming up from below had a smell I recognized. Faint, metallic. Wrong. I closed the basement door. I have not opened it since. I use the bulkhead entrance now when I need to access the utility panel. I don't know what is under the ridge. I don't know if it's still under the ridge or if it was ever only under the ridge. I know that the systems we trust to measure and monitor and document and respond are not designed for whatever this is. They are designed for erosion and equipment failure and budget cycles and liability. They are designed for things that fit into ticket queues and inspection schedules and priority matrices, and whatever pushed that steel plate open from below, whatever left those handprints with the wrong number of fingers, whatever made the air taste like copper in a tunnel that has been sealed for 20 years, it understands our systems better than we do. It generated sensor IDs that integrated seamlessly into our telemetry network. It transmitted GPS coordinates through our radio repeater. It knew when I would come, and it was sitting in a chair waiting for me. And when the engineers arrived 8 days later, there was nothing to find. Not because it hid, because it cleaned up. The only question I still think about, the one that follows me through every shift and every mile of that empty highway, is this. The phantom sensor, S9-GEO-07, the one with no installation record. It was reading body temperature, 97.8 degrees, rising to 99.1 before it went offline. I assumed it was measuring whatever was down there. But sensors don't choose what they measure what they're touching. And I never found the sensor. I never found where it was installed. I check my own temperature every morning now. It's been 99.1 for 3 weeks. My doctor says it's a low-grade fever, probably stress. She ordered blood work. The results have been pending for 11 days. The lab says they're experiencing processing delays. The ticket is still open. That's where I'll leave it for tonight. I don't have a resolution for you because I don't have one for myself, and I think you'd know if I invented one. But if you've stayed this long, if you've listened to a man talk about telemetry data and ticket numbers and folding chairs for the better part of half an hour, then I think you understand something that I'm still learning, which is that the truly frightening things don't announce themselves. They file paperwork, they integrate, they wait. So if you're driving home tonight, or if you're lying in bed listening to this in the dark, I want you to take a breath, a real one. Feel the air in your chest. Notice that it smells like your room and your sheets and your life, and that it's exactly the temperature it should be. Hold on to that. That ordinary air is a gift, and you should not take it for granted. Be safe out there. I'll talk to you again when I have something worth saying. Good night.